Okay, so we're just going to continue on with what we were doing. We just have to add a few more vocabulary words, but before we start, let's look at these first three. So this first one, notice it has an arrow on the front and the back, so we know that that means it goes on and on forever, so that's going to be a line. So we know that this is a line. And this one doesn't give us points, but if you notice we have this like italicized letter here, so that is the other way to name a line. So this is line N. Okay, looking at the next one, we see that this is a point, so this is just point A. And the last one there, we see that, again, it has the arrowheads on both sides, so we know that this is a line. And we talked on the other video that it doesn't matter what order I put those letters in, so I could call this PQ, or we could call it QP. It really does not matter which way you do it as long as you label it correctly. All right, so moving forward here, we have a few new vocabulary words. The first one is collinear lines. And I want to point out, do you see this word line inside collinear? So that's telling you that these are on the same line. So like co-workers work at the same place. Collinear are on the same line. So we're looking for points that are on the same line. So if I look at this picture, we notice that F, E, and D are all on the same line. It does not matter what order we put them in. We're naming points, so as long as you're using capital letters, you're perfectly fine. So F, E, and D are all collinear points. The next one is non-collinear, so it kind of makes sense. If they're non-collinear, that means they're not on the same line. So if I look at this, F and D, so we've got point F here and point D here, they're both on the same line, but notice this E guy, he is not on the same line. So it says since E is off of the line, points F, E, and D are non-collinear. So they are non-collinear points because you have that one point that is not on the same line. So we started this whole process by talking about vocabulary words, points, lines, and planes, but I haven't mentioned planes yet, so I want to take a few moments to talk about planes. So planes are flat surfaces made up of infinitely many points and extends in all directions infinitely. A plane is defined by at least 3 non-collinear points. So you got to think about, planes are usually represented by like a slanted rectangle like in this picture, or a tabletop, or a desk, or a wall. So the thing is you got to think about the fact that planes will never stop. So although we're looking at it as like a slanted rectangle or the top of a table, it's not going to stop. It's going to keep going on forever and ever and ever and ever in all directions. Now, when we name them, we can name them a few different ways. So we can name them with 3 non-collinear points, like it just said. Or we can use this letter down here in the corner with no points. All right, so we can call this plane R because that's the letter that's there with no points. Or we can do the 3 points in any order. So I could call this X, Y, Z. I could call this Z, Y, X. I could call this Y, X, Z. So pretty much any combination of those 3 letters you can use. You cannot use the R because it's not a point. But the other 3 we can name in any order. Notice that when we wrote these, it's all capital letters, but there's no commas, because when you put commas there, you're talking about the points themselves. No commas, we're talking about the plane, the overall plane, the whole thing. Okay, the next word here is coplanar points. So just like collinear meant same line, coplanar means same plane. So these are points that lie on the same plane. So we can see right here that A, B, and C are coplanar. They're on the same plane, coplanar. If we're talking about points that are not on the same plane, we're talking about non-coplanar. So again, there's that word, non-coplanar. So notice here how H is not on the same plane as J and I. So one way to look at this is kind of looking at the corner of a room and you're looking at 2 walls. So this here, where J and I are, would be one wall of the room. And then the wall with the H, this, would be another wall. So like there's a corner of the room and those are 2 walls coming together. So H is not on the same plane as J and I. So J, I, and H are non-coplanar, not on the same plane. All right, so we're going to look at an example here. It says name the plane in 3 ways. So we just talked about how to do this. So now I'm going to see if you can. So I want you to go ahead and think about how you could name this. So remember, you can name it with a letter that has no point near it, or 3 points that are not on the same line. So I'm going to give you just a second to take care of that. Okay, so you should have been able to see that you could have named it plane R because of this R down here in the corner, or 3 non-coplanar points. So you did have to use this V at some point. So you could have said TPV, you could have said PSV, or you could have said TSV, or any combination of those 3 letters. So I don't care what order you put the PV, T, or the SPV, as long as you have like one of those groupings. All right, question 2 says name 2 sets of coplanar points. Coplanar points, so that means points on the same plane. So we need 2 sets of 3. For instance, we could say TPV. TPV. Notice I had to put commas because we're talking about the points this time. Or we could say PSV. PSV. Or we could say VST. V, S, and T. All right, so all of those are options for coplanar points. And the last set says name 2 sets of non-coplanar points. So here's where I want to point out, do you see this dotted line right down here? Okay, so what that's telling you is this line that starts at Q and goes through P and becomes dotted, is actually going through the plane. So it would be like a pole that's going through the table. So Q is not on the plane. So as long as you use point Q and 2 other points, then you have non-coplanar points. So I could say Q, T, and P would be an example. I could say Q, P, and S would be an example. Or I could say Q, V, and T would be an example. There's lots of examples. As long as Q is one of them and 2 of the other points, you are golden. And the last thing in this lesson that we need to talk about is this concept of intersections. So intersection is where 2 or more geometric figures cross. So if I look at this first picture, we notice that there's 2 lines. There's line L. So line L is here. And there is line M. So here is our line M. And what we want to know is where do they cross? Where do they touch? Like, what do they have in common? And so if we look at this, they cross right here at P. So their intersection is P. And it turns out that the intersection of 2 lines is always a point. So whatever point they cross at is their intersection. When you're dealing with planes, though, it's a little bit different. So we have the blue plane, which is B, and we have the green plane, which is A. And we can see that they cross, or they have in common, this line right here. So whenever we have 2 planes that intersect, it's going to be a line. In this case, it's going to be line R. But if you think about it, you can think about 2 walls coming together in a room. The 2 walls would come together into like a corner, and the corner would represent a line. So we can see that kind of situation in our everyday lives as well.